So it's 7:02, so we're going to kick off this public hearing and call it to order. So I'm here as a member of the Select Board, speaking in my own capacity as an individual. We have our town planner, Greg Emond here, our assistant town planner, Karen Horn here, and town council, Bob Galvin. So town meeting's coming up Monday night, October 20th. So tonight we wanted to have one last public hearing for folks to ask questions so that we can address as much information as possible at town meeting and hopefully answer any outstanding questions that might be out there. So we'll just get started. We'll kind of go through some draft presentations we have, and then, we have folks in the audience as well to ask any questions. And, this is a hybrid meeting via Zoom as well, so people can tune in. So I just thought I'd kick off. A lot of folks have asked, we know if there's a list of grants that the town would no longer be eligible for, but what's the real world impact and what's the real world implication? How many would we actually qualify for? So when this law was first passed, we weren't really too worried about it because there was only 3 grants, but the law has been amended several times since it was first passed, and the total is now up to 17 in total. And then the governor's office has also indicated that they will take your compliance status into account when awarding discretionary funding as well. And that's a pretty broad spectrum and a big bucket, so that's concerning as well. So the first one is we had a joint grant with the town of Scituate to help fund the permitting and study for the dredging of the North-South River, kind of the first step in that process. So we had that money in hand, and we lost our portion, our half of that grant, which was a little over $130,000. Scituate, as a workaround, asked the state if they could keep all of it and therefore move forward, but the state said, no, you're only getting your half. So now at town meeting, we'll be funding our half through certified free cash. So that'll be in a town meeting article. A big one was with the airport. So they had money from the state in hand for maintenance equipment, snow plow clearing equipment, snow clearing equipment, and a new electronic security gate as well, worth about $500,000. That was taken away by the state because we're not in compliance. So that's definitely the biggest tangible one to date that's been pulled away from us. The schools applied for a grant to help fund staff and supplies for preschool education. That was about $45,700, and that's a coordinated family and community engagement grant. And then I'll get more into the details of this later on, but there are millions of dollars that the Harbor Master has applied for in Seaport Economic Council grants for climate resiliency that will not be considered by the state. So later on, I'll get to some examples over the years of grants that, we've won. So next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so, I can hover back over this during Q&A, but this is the list of the 17 grant programs. A lot of folks have asked what that list is, so here it is. And again, I don't want to take up a ton of time, but, we can circle back to this and hover over it, and, I'm happy to provide that to folks as well. But, it's a lot of stuff in the realm of, infrastructure that we would apply for. Not every single grant on this list is something that we would apply for, but there's certainly ones on the list like infrastructure and capital improvement that we would apply for that would have a real tangible impact. So if you go to the next slide, Rob, it just continues. So again, you can see a lot of stuff for infrastructure and seawalls and things of that nature. Again, so these are off the table now. So next slide. Okay, so a lot of folks are asking, these are grants that we apply for, and we don't win them every single year, but we have a pretty good success rate with the Seaport Economic Council grants. And these are grants that the Harbor Master alone has applied for and won over the years. So these are all grants and discretionary fund examples that the town has raked in over the years thanks to the Harbor Master. So you can see $500,000, $1 million for the Harbor Master building. That was a Seaport Economic Council grant. And then the Harbor Master building in the Maritime Center was built with an additional $2.1 million in state grants. You can see $95,000 for the Green Harbor Pier project. In 2018, the state dredge grant program for the Marshfield and Situate South River, that was about $550,000. 2024, the Green Harbor Public Boat Ramp project, that was discretionary state funding, that was $650,000. And then the big one coming down the pike is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers jetty project, which has a cap of up to $15 million. That's currently slated for 2027, 2028 for construction to begin. And we have already allocated, $700,000 from certified free cash. And those construction phases of those projects are usually a 90-10 split. So, we might have to come up with another $1 million to allocate towards the project at a future town meeting, from certified free cash. And this is something that's typically ideal for a seaport, grant type funding. So next slide, please. This one, it looks like it's a duplicate, so you can just go to the next slide, please. All right, so the litigation update, and we can circle back to this, I'm sure, if we have some audience questions, but a lot of folks have asked, why are we taking this up again? Well, we have a lot of new information and changes and developments since the last time that town meeting voted. So since town meeting last voted, the Milton case has now been settled. So that was a big development, and we were waiting to see how that settled. And basically, the State Supreme Court for Massachusetts, the SJC, they ruled that the MBTA Communities Act was constitutional, and they also ruled that the Attorney General has enforcement authority. And the Attorney General's office has notified us that she will begin enforcement against non-compliant communities in January of 2026. And just to kind of give you the profile of, how the fight has been going to date, we've had 10 different communities using a combination of about 5 different law firms that have challenged the MBTA Communities Act in Plymouth Superior Court. And so those towns were Duxbury, Hamilton, Hanson, Holden, Marshfield, Middleborough, Middleton, Wenham, Wrentham, and Weston. And I just put a little note on Middleborough because before the injunction hearing, Middleborough settled, and they had a $3 million grant restored from the state, and the state basically allowed them to use a 40R zoning district with a few acres added to it to count as their MBTA compliant district. And, folks just, if you don't want to take my word for it and you wanted to look it up, some of those law firms are, Brooks and Drennis, Downhill Law, Galvin and Galvin, KP Law, which is a huge firm, as well as Mead, Tallerman, and Costa. So, anyone who wants to, nitpick our case, it's not just us. We've had 5 different law firms in total in a number of different communities directly challenge and take this legislation to court. And I want to emphasize, too, that we were the only town that argued that our constitutional rights were violated and the state can't compel us to vote yes. And that was the argument that the state had the most difficulty going up against, it by their own admission. That's the one that they had the toughest time with. So that was something that we uniquely came up with, and Attorney Galvin did for Marshfield. But again, it's been 5 different big law firms in total who have been challenging this law to date. And, next slide, please. Go back one, I think, there you go. Nope, perfect, yeah, there you go. Okay, so picking up, so we went to Plymouth Superior Court, and they denied all of these towns' joint motion for preliminary injunction, and they granted the state's motion to dismiss. So what does that mean? It means that we lost our challenge in the Plymouth Superior Court. And again, just to recap, we made 2 arguments. First, that the MBTA Communities Act is an unfunded mandate. And again, what I touched on a minute ago was that this law disenfranchises our voters because you can't compel them to vote yes, right? And so, unfortunately, the judge rejected both of those claims. So what happened after that? Well, only Marshfield Middleton, and Weston have filed a notice of appeal with the state Supreme Court. So to date, over 100 communities have adopted the MBTA Communities Act and had a compliant zoning district passed. And right now, it's only Marshfield, Middleton, and Weston left standing who are trying to take this case directly to the state Supreme Court. So next slide, please. All right, so that's where we stand right now. And again, I just want to confirm what the state has said and what is on the record, right? So the state has made very clear that towns that fail to comply with the MBTA Communities Act, you automatically lose certain state funding, which includes funding for local infrastructure, like roads, bridges, water and sewer improvements, known as MassWorks. So when we went through that list earlier, the 17 different grants, you'll see that one of the columns has a general category for what those grants fall into. So MassWorks is one of them. Another one is Housing Works. That's for local infrastructure projects that support housing. And then for Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, those are Housing Choice Designation grants. And we would also lose state funding under the Local Capital Projects Fund to give some examples. And then, so those 17 grants on that list have gotten a lot of attention, but I also want to make sure that we don't let fly under the radar that the Healy-Driscoll administration has notified communities that compliance with the MBTA Communities Act will be considered when dispensing certain discretionary local aid. So next slide, please. All right, next slide. That's repetitive. You can skip the next three. That's repetitive. Skip that one. Repetitive. Okay, perfect. So really the task for town meeting is, you're trying to decide and weigh, first, I think, what's the likelihood of us winning at the state Supreme Court? So again, right now, at this exact moment in time, and that can change, Marshfield, Middleton, and Weston are the three towns that have filed a notice of appeal to go directly to the state Supreme Court. And a little bit of a difference is that Middleton is not like Marshfield. So Marshfield's an MBTA adjacent community. Middleton neither has an MBTA station, nor is it an MBTA adjacent community. So they're unique from us. Weston is like Marshfield, where they're an MBTA adjacent community, and they are also taking up this zoning article one last time at their town meeting that's coming up on December 2nd. So, if they decide to do a cost-benefit analysis and they pass it, we're kind of standing alone here. So again, as town meeting voters, you have to weigh the risk and reward of going to court and are we going to win, and what's the cost of compliance versus non-compliance. And at the end of the day, do we want to control our own destiny and pick the location that has the highest number of obstacles to new housing being built, and we can apply a higher level of stricter standards? Or do we want to leave that up to the state to decide? And I'd underscore, too, that we can run a dual-track approach here, because we can get into compliance at this town meeting and pass the article and continue our lawsuit. And if we win the lawsuit, then we just repeal it in the spring. But at least in the interim, we get access again to that grant funding into discretionary state spending as well. And, the state's intended goal with this legislation is to increase the supply of new housing in the state. So what do you think they're more likely to do? To pick the area that we've proposed all along that has the highest number of obstacles to construction? Or are they going to pick somewhere that's going to maximize the potential for new housing being built? And I think I'll leave off there, Rob, and turn it over to Greg. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Greg Guimond, Ice House Lane. I'm the town planner. The MBTA zoning articles, there's 3 articles. 13 is the main text, 14 is the zoning overlay district, 15 is the change of use tables. Some of this has already been covered, so I'm just going to hit a couple of them. 14 communities are non-compliant. The legislative reform of Chapter 40A, Section 3A, the reform bills have stalled in the State House, and any potential ballot initiatives will not be voted on until November of 2026, which leaves us exposed for quite a long time. The town will lose eligibility for the additional grants, as Steve has mentioned, and the town will lose the ability to have a say in the location, density, height, and maintaining our 10% affordable housing, and also keeping our higher nitrogen loading standards for the 5 parts per million. Under the MBTA Act, the state is calling for us to create a district for multifamily housing that allows 1,158 units by right. It has a minimum 50 acres requirement in size. As I mentioned, it has to have multifamily by right. And I would stress the state only cares about market rate. They did allow towns to add the restriction for 10% of the housing, but they capped it at 10%. It does not have age restrictions, has to have a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre, and they want it suitable for families and children. Oh, okay, now it worked. Okay. Important clarifications. Section 3A does not require multifamily housing to be built. It's compliance, and I stress the word built. We just have to have it zoned that way. The capacity analysis conducted by the planning staff does not mean the production of units will occur. It does not compel communities to design or pay for any new infrastructure to accommodate the future multifamily development. It does not supersede the Mass Wetlands Protection Act or Title V of the Mass Environmental Code, and it does not eliminate the B2 district. The MBTA zoning district is a mixed-use overlay on top of the B2. Mapping background, you can see that's the first map we had to run when the state wanted each of the communities. We had to run their mapping program on our town. The state required us to take a very detailed GIS mapping to complete our compliance model submittal. Whoa. Thank you. So the mapping guidelines that the state had excluded lands which we could not use and had to stay away from. They included wetlands, ponds, rivers, protected restriction open space, wellhead protection areas, which is Zone 1, Title V setbacks to surface water supply, which we do not have, rights of way, and most public lands. Sensitive lands the state wanted us to try to stay away from included the Zone 2s, wellhead protection, the special flood hazard areas, A and V zones, active farmlands, priority habitat of rare species, and surface water protections B and C. The state does allow the community to include land that's already developed, and that's underlined because that's important to remember. Next slide. The planning staff used the following principles when we tried to identify possible locations. We needed to locate it along the Gatra Sail route because that's our only transit route that we have. Areas within walking distance of stores and services. We checked village centers. We checked the commercial zones. We avoided excluded lands. We tried to avoid the sensitive areas. The only one we did not was the Zone 2. Try to overload, also we tried not to overload one area of town, and by meaning overloading, if an area already has a 40B or several 40Bs, we were trying to stay away from those residential areas. and we try to improve existing land use where possible, i.e. existing grandfathered uses in our Zone 2, like automobile repair, to have them potentially phase out over time. And number one priority for us was minimize the impact to the town. Next slide. So for the last 3 years, this is where we've been proposing, which is School Street on the north side of 139 over to Direct Granite, which is over by the high school to your right. Next slide. You can see on this slide that there is no vacant land. The one area that's highlighted up on the top, which is the back end of Quirk, Jeep, has a conservation restriction on it, which means it cannot be developed. Next slide. The location parameters that we were working on, the state model requires a half mile within a transit station. That is not possible because Greenbush is 1.5 miles away from the town border. So we're nowhere near that. Again, the state wanted us to do it along a transit route, which we have done along the Gatra route. State wanted walking distance to stores and services. The area we picked, it is within walking distance to stores, restaurants, and services. And they wanted it near an existing village, downtown center, or commercial district. And yes, it is along a commercial district. Next slide. Other areas evaluated included the residential areas, several residential areas in North Marshfield, the RB district along 139, heading towards the ocean from the funeral home, downtown area in Marinus Hill, and the industrial area. These areas were determined by the planning staff to have more detrimental effects on the town than the proposed area. Next slide. The bylaw parameters, so you have the left column is the state model, the right column is the Marshfield proposal. Height, state model allows up to 6 floors. Marshfield's proposal caps it at 4. Density, the state requires a minimum density of 15 units per acre, and they do not specify a cap. Marshfield's proposal, we cap it at 16. And that was based on a calculation to have a 4-story height limit on our buildings. Lot area, the state does not require a minimum lot area. We did a 30,000 square foot minimum lot area. Water protection, Title V is what the state's looking for, 5 parts per million. We put down 5 parts per million, which is our water resource protection standard. And then affordable housing, the state does not require the affordable, but allows the towns to do the 10%. We would require that 10%, and that's important to keep us level on our 10% with the state. So Marshfield, at the moment, does not have to worry about an unfriendly 40B because we have 10% of our housing stock, which is affordable. Next slide. By passing this article, the town can choose the location, require review standards for site plan review of the proposal, require 10% of the new housing to meet the 40B requirement, use land already developed as part of the new district, cap the density at 16 units per acre, cap the height at 4 floors, ensure compliance with our nitrogen loading and lot coverage for the Water Resource Protection District. And as Steve mentioned, we can continue our appeal. Next slide. If Marshfield does not vote to create an MBTA multifamily overlay district, the state could take the following actions: revoking our eligibility on many state grants, which we've already talked about. Ask the Supreme Judicial Court to allow a court-appointed special master to decide where to locate the zoning district in Marshfield and what, if any, review standards would be used. Could locate the zoning anywhere in town, and it might require affordability component, which could result in a higher number of market rate units, which would reduce our 10% affordability number and open the town up to unfriendly 40B proposals again. And if we do not adopt the zoning district for the multifamily development may occur anywhere in town. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you. So I guess we can turn it over to questions and answers.
Perfect.
Hi, Diane Jordan, Bancroft Street. So thank you. So I had doubts about the redevelopment viability of the Quirk building. So at like midnight on Saturday night, because I had nothing better to do, it occurred to me to use GTP to create a market analysis for that. So I put in the limitations that the planning board has identified that the state approved into that system, and I asked for an analysis on the redevelopment of the Quirk building. I undervalued the property by $2 million, just to be in the moderate, like kind of mid-range on it. It took a chat about 38 seconds to compile the data, and ended up with a market analysis that shows a negative 6% profit on that redevelopment, which was like 112 units, but a negative 6% profit. The industry standard for developers to even consider a redevelopment project is 10 to 15% profit, and this is a negative 6. So it's not a viable redevelopment project. And then I posted that on Facebook. I'll post it again. Anybody can see it on my page. It's public. So last night I did the same thing with the properties from 762 to 752 Plain Street, which is like the Ming to, I think, Starbucks. That also came out as not viable because of the limitations that the planning department has identified, and that came out to like 41 units, but a negative 8.9% profit on that. So I verified that AI came online for this type of zoning redevelopment market analysis in late 2024. It collects zoning data at a rate of 4,000 words per hour, which is equivalent to 500 to 1,000 pages of zoning data for every hour. It came online with zoning data in late 2024, but it came online to be able to do this type of market analysis in the middle of this year. And at that rate of data collection, it has now attained a 90 to 95% accuracy rate for this type of market analysis or any type of zoning market analysis. So I'm going to do this, because I have nothing better to do, for every single address in that zone. And I will post it on my Facebook page so that anybody can see it. And it's so easy. Anybody who has an iPhone, I don't know about Androids, but anybody with an iPhone has chat on their phone. They can just do it themselves. I had no training. It was super, super easy. I'm using ChatGTP. Like I said, anybody can do it. Anybody can see them on my page when I post the ones I've posted, and I'll post more. I think the planning department has done an amazing job with choosing this zone. It's not possible for any human to be able to match what this AI system can do with regard to analyzing zoning numbers. No, nothing against the planning department, but it's not possible. And so I think that, this clearly means that voting yes on this article is really our only chance of getting out of this thing with not getting a ton of redevelopment or even probably any, as far as I can tell from what I'm looking at, not being an expert. But AI is definitely an expert in this. So thanks.
Thank you. And I'll pivot in just a second to Scott Dixon, who has a virtual hand raised. But to add some context to Diane's comments, another reason that this district is being proposed is because there's not any existing town sewer. So any developer would have to build an on-site treatment plant, which is millions of dollars, and that permitting process takes 3 to 4 years. So if we don't propose it here, then obviously they would prefer to go somewhere where it's cheaper to hook up to existing town sewer.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that I didn't even include the cost of running the sewer from T Rock Gardens up to that Quirk building, which I did that today, and without putting in like all the manhole covers, the size of the pipes, because I didn't have that information in my head. That figure came out to $8 million. So $8 million on top of negative 6% or negative 8.9% profit for these buildings to be redeveloped.
Thank you. All right, Scott Dixon. We just need another second to unmute you, Scott. You might have to do it yourself manually. Perfect, you're good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I have 2 comments. First one is a question, really. There's some confusion. First of all, Scott Dixon, 82 Ocean Street. There's some confusion around federal grants being excluded from something that non-compliance could impact. And when I think of federal grants, in Grant Rock in particular, I think of coastal resiliency grants for things like seawalls. And I know the DPW in their long-range plan had a plan to extend the higher seawall from where it ends right now at South Street up past the old Charlie's to add further flood protection to the Esplanade area of Grant Rock. My memory says that those grants are funded by a mix of federal, state, and local, with 50% of that funding coming from the federal government, 25% from the state government, and 25% from the town. I am assuming in that case, if the 50% funding is still in place from the federal government, then the only component we'd be losing is the 25% from the state. Does that make sense to you?
Bob or Greg?
It makes sense to me. The federal grants are unaffected.
Okay. So the component, the town would have to ante up an extra 25% if they wanted to continue with that plan in order to make up the loss of the state grant, is the way I'm looking at it. Okay. And I guess my second comment is, based on everything I've heard and reviewed on this topic, I think the town would be smart to vote yes on this project. It seems to me that would be the wise thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. All right, next we'll go to the next virtual raised hand. Your profile picture is a pink box with a white letter J, so floor is yours. But you might have to manually unmute yourself. You're still muted.
She wants to go to the bottom left of her screen, or whoever it is.
Yeah. All right, we'll give that one a minute. Bob, one question that I anticipate might come up during town meeting that would be good to address tonight is, we've covered the grant funding and the discretionary state funding, but what would the consequences be if we lose our case at the state Supreme Court? So let's say town meeting votes no, we go to court, we lose our case at the SJC. I know that in Milton specifically, the Attorney General was in the process of trying to appoint a state receiver to pick the district before Milton finally got into compliance. So that's not really a theoretical threat. That's something that they tried to put on the table before. But my question for you is, you know, it sounds like there's two avenues where the state could pick the district, or a developer could approach the state and propose an area. So could you explain how that could potentially work?
Yeah. First of all, I just want to clarify, when we lost our case at the Plymouth Superior Court, we filed a notice of appeal, and we entered the case in the Massachusetts Court of Appeals, not the SJC. I met with the Select Board in August and recommended that we ask the Supreme Judicial Court, which is the highest appellate court in Massachusetts, to take this case from the appeals court so that we didn't waste time and money and had the state's highest court weigh in on the issues that we were appealing. At the very beginning of September, we did file a petition for direct appellate review with the Supreme Judicial Court. The Attorney General had a couple of weeks to respond. They did respond, did not oppose the town's request, although they opposed the basis for our request. But everyone agreed that there were significant issues of public interest, and that matter is still pending with the SJC. They've assigned a docket number to the case, a direct appellate review docket number. But since they haven't responded, the time came for the town to file its brief, and we filed our appellate brief with the Court of Appeals earlier today, raising the two issues that we litigated, the two issues that we think that the Superior Judge made a mistake on, and they are the two issues that you've already described. The brief is available. I think I've sent it to everybody, most of the town officials that have been interested in the matter, the Select Board, the town administrator, and all the other attorneys, and some of the attorneys that represent the communities involved. We've argued the issue of whether the mandate of the law disenfranchises voters who have the right under Chapter 48, Section 5, to effectuate this law by approving it, approving a zoning compliant district, not the law itself. The law itself is not up to Marshfield. The law is a state law, but in order to effectuate the law, Marshfield and its town meeting voters have to approve a compliant district. The other issue that we argued was that the law, as it affects Marshfield, constitutes an unfunded mandate, and that's the same argument that all of the other communities raised. The other two communities that have appeals, I expect, will also raise, and the other two firms that represent the other two communities will make arguments similar to the argument that we made today, that, you know, we've incurred direct service and cost obligations as a result of the law, and that because the zoning here creates a by right obligation, the town will incur costs and expenses directly as a result of this that are not speculative, that are only quantified when we know what gets built. But those are the two arguments that we've raised. So the Attorney General will have approximately a month to file a responsive brief. If the case goes on track sometime in the next 60 days after that, we'll probably hear of a hearing date. I would hope we would get a hearing with the 3-judge panel at the appeals court, and it usually takes about 110 to 120 days to get a decision once you've engaged in an oral argument at the appeals court. If enough communities appeal, it's possible that the SJC will still take the case. They haven't decided it one way or the other. It'll probably follow on a similar track, but it's not certain that it'll go there. What I would tell you, and what I said when we were at the Joint Advisory Board before, it is my opinion that the issue we raised is a valid issue. I'm not sure that it'll slow the court down or that it will slow the state down. If we don't win, and to answer your question directly, No one can be exactly certain because the state hasn't sued us yet and hasn't indicated what remedy they want. But if we lost the case and we lose the appeal, it is likely that a court, based on prior precedent where towns have defied the state, the court could entertain a contempt proceeding and fine the town. The court could also appoint a receiver to act in place of the town's voters. And it's possible also that developers could make the argument that the town does not have a prohibitive bylaw that prevents this type of housing and make the pitch that they can propose this type of housing anywhere in the town, provided they meet the minimum state requirements of 5, but 5 acres. And there are a number of properties in residential districts of the town, probably even some commercial districts or industrial districts in the PMUD that easily qualify for that. And if a receiver is appointed, I think your guess is as good as mine what a receiver will do, but I'm certain that the receiver's costs and expenses they'll be looking for that from the town. I'm certain that a receiver will not, I'm not certain, but I think it's highly unlikely that a receiver would choose the same district that the planners in Marshfield have chosen, because even though they've said the worst case scenarios, there's 650 units, I think the realistic scenario is that it's minimal, if any, that will be built there. I heard Ms. Jordan's analysis. I'm not as capable with ChatGPT as she is, but the concepts she's talking about are relevant to me. Applying my own little analysis to it, they have 7.5 acres. They're going to need an area for a leaching system because there's no sewer up there. That's in a water resource protection district, which they might be able to ignore if we don't pass this bylaw. If we pass this bylaw, they'll be limited to 4 stories. That means they could construct a maximum of maybe 120 units there, probably a little less than that. The assessed value of that property is $9.9 million. Buildings and land, that's not fair market value, that's full fair value. So that means the market value is likely higher. I don't think Mr. Quirk is interested in selling, or he hasn't told anybody that he's interested in selling, and it looks to me like a very profitable business. So not only would you have to buy the buildings and the real estate, you'd have to convince him to relocate his business somewhere else or pay him for his business. So it's inconceivable to me that anyone could acquire that property, the 7.5 acres that's potentially developable at any reasonable cost that would result in a builder making any money and not losing a significant amount of money. I don't think it's wise to do the math because I'm sure that's more of a financial analysis that somebody that's more experienced than me, but it doesn't seem to make much sense. And it appears that towns have chosen, if you like this type of housing, you've located in an area where there's opportunities for it to be built. Some of those towns have gone out and then applied for a new catalyst grant, which now exists, where you can surprisingly get an infrastructure grant for the state. And then there's a lot more towns that have zoned it like the planners in Marshfield have, and tried to locate it in an area where it can't be built easily, if ever. It doesn't impact neighborhoods. No one could deny that there'd be a traffic impact from 650 units, but Route 139 is probably the arterial road in the town that has the most capacity to handle traffic. I don't know what happens in terms of the total number of units that get built elsewhere, but if a developer was able to locate a 5-acre parcel in other portions of the town, and the number was not 650 because we didn't elect to choose the cap that I think the planners are trying to target here, the number of units could be as much as 1,500 units in the industrial park, where there are several parcels available to be built, certainly impacting the residents there that are already adversely impacted by the 240B projects and have been very vocal and justifiably so about the impact to their neighborhood. It seems to me that that pits neighbor against neighbor at that point. And we will get the traffic impact, and we could get a traffic impact that's significantly worse. It'll probably still be on Route 139, because unless you live over off of Caswell Street or up in Blackmount, and you choose to go to Route 3 through Duxbury, most of the town probably goes out, goes to Route 3, up Route 139 or down Union Street or one of those roads. So it seems like the traffic impact will come one way or the other. So to be very precise, we're not exactly sure what option that the Attorney General will take, but we are certain that the Attorney General will sue us. And if we've lost the case, our ability to maintain control over the situation is doubtful. Doesn't mean we couldn't try to rush back or try to convince a judge we could rush back and approve a zone, but if we've gone to town meeting 4 times, or 3 times and it fails, I don't know what the prospect, or what the Attorney General will say about the prospect of a 4th time. I've seen a lot of stuff online, and my brief speaks for where I stand on the issues. I think that the law is fundamentally flawed. I think it impacts people's rights to vote. I think it was poorly designed. It impacts people in a way that's visceral and upsets people, including myself and I'm sure everybody else that I know, because it does basically force us to vote yes, which is the issue that I've raised. But it's a mistake to think that the state can't zone this in Marshfield. There are subjects that towns cannot regulate, set forth in Chapter 40A, Section 3. I think they envisioned that towns would be receptive to this and would respond to the threat of loss of grant funds. I'm sure they didn't envision the situation that they have today. But when the SJC identified a flaw in the process, in the procedural framework, they fixed it in 6 days. It might take them a little longer with some legislation if we're successful, but the state appears to be committed to this course of action as a measure to combat the housing crisis, and I just have to believe that the state will not leave the 160 communities or the 142 communities that are compliant and the additional ones hanging. That's my best, prediction as to what would happen. Again, don't like the law. I think my brief speaks for itself. Some of that sentiment is conveyed in the online comments that I've read. I think everybody has a right to be upset. People should not be upset about anything that the town or fellow residents are doing at all, because this isn't something that we asked for or brought on. And I think the planning board has recommended a strategy that's proven to work. Doesn't obligate us to have anything, and I think Ms. Jordan is right in, I haven't done the analysis that she's done, but I think the planning board's really tried to negate their ability to do it. Does that mean the state won't change the law and take away that? It does not mean that they won't change the law, but if we win, they're going to likely change the law anyways. So we have a difficult circumstance. And the one opinion that I have given, shared it with the moderator, I think I shared it with the planning board, is that I do believe that we can continue with our lawsuit and pass the bylaw if the town so chooses. And I think that the Attorney General will probably challenge that, but I think I'm comfortable saying that I think that we can pursue this, and if we prevail on the case, I think you'll see an immediate request to put on a warrant a rescission of the bylaws. I think that's a strategy that deals with this from a stronger position rather than a weaker position.
Yeah, thank you. And to recap, so, in terms of our legal case, we're at the next stage in the process with the Court of Appeals, but from a practical standpoint, if we lose, we're going to appeal to the Supreme Judicial Court. If the state loses, they're going to appeal to the Supreme Judicial Court. So why waste all that time and all that money and just ask the Supreme Judicial Court to hear the case directly and to take it up and save time and money, and that's still pending. And, you know, if the state tries to put a receiver in charge or a developer approaches the state directly, since we don't have a compliant zoning district and they try to propose one, we'll fight it. But one point of clarification I wanted to ask you, Bob, is, you know, we're proposing one district that's, you know, roughly, you know, 50 acres, give or take, Greg, more than that, 75? 84. And, you know, the problem is that if we lose and a state receiver gets put in charge or a developer goes directly to the state, that could end up in multiple locations, right? They wouldn't have to pick one big area. They could put a 6-story building in Brant Rock. They could do a 6-story building in Green Harbor, and they could spread it around town. Is that true?
Well, there's no precedent for what they call the builder's remedy in Massachusetts. But there have been towns that contain no effective prohibitions against solar, and in those circumstances, the entire town was subject to having a solar use. There were towns years ago that did not zone for a adult entertainment district. And if a town did not zone for an adult entertainment district, the argument was that it could not be precluded as First Amendment protected uses from being located anywhere. So you saw a flurry of towns, including Marshfield and Pembroke, that all established adult entertainment zones so that there was a location and the residential neighborhoods of the town were protected. And I think that there's some correlation to what's going on now. I think what the planning board is trying to do is locate it in an area where it simply just can't be built. On its best case scenario, if this were approved and they could find a ready, willing, and able seller, they would still, without sewer, be obligated to go obtain a wastewater discharge permit from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it would take them years to get that permit in all likelihood. I think Mr. Geeman is right. By imposing the requirement that be a height limitation of 4 stories, you make it less attractive to a builder and less economic to build it. I think by imposing the requirement that you have 10% of that housing as affordable, you make it even less desirable. By imposing some setback requirements, you make it even further desirable. And I think the planning board has done everything within its authority to make this district difficult, if not impossible.
But is it a possibility that instead of this all being contained in one area, if we pick the district, that you could end up with these
Sure.
6-story
Absolutely.
in multiple locations?
Yeah, I mean, a receiver is probably going to pick it where it could be built.
Yeah.
I mean, and it could be built across the street in the industrial district. It could be built on 5-acre parcels or a portion of the town that includes residential areas that the planning board has been trying to avoid. All of that is fair game. I just refuse to believe that the state's going to treat us better in light of our stance.
Right, and even in the most optimistic scenario, if for some reason they pick the same area we're proposing, we're not whole and it's not apples to apples because we lose the stricter standards that we put in place. So let's say the state happens to pick the same area, you lose that.
We don't know
4-story gap.
exactly what will happen.
Right.
But it's likely if we don't have a district and they zone one, they're not going to include the stricter standards that the planning board has recommended in a district.
Right.
I mean, their mandate, the receiver's mandate, would likely be Marshfield needs multifamily housing. It doesn't meet its requirements. Select an area where it's reasonable to expect that that use can be constructed.
Yep. And did you have anything you wanted to add, Greg, or?
No.
Okay, we have a question at the podium.
Yeah, thank you. Steve Lukatis, 184 Elm Street. So the presentation we just saw, will that be what you're proposing for, that this is the way you'll do it on Monday?
Yeah, I'll probably make some edits based on the, feedback tonight. I'll try to shorten it up and trim it up a little bit, but yeah, those are I kind of wanted to test it out tonight and see what kind of feedback we get.
I have like 4 points that maybe you can improve on. I think questions are going to be asked.
Yeah.
Maybe you should address it ahead of time. One was You talked about discretionary aid. I think you got to define that better and put a number on that and what that actually means. Because so many people are arguing for and against using numbers that I think they're pulling out of the air. I think you got to define it, put it on the board, put it on a tally sheet, like you had it. So what is discretionary aid? What do you call that? What does that mean?
Sure. Well, all of the grant programs that are enumerated are, in a sense, discretionary aid programs, okay? Where the government evaluates an application for an award of grant funds. Some of it is to promote affordable housing, some of it is to promote water and sewer infrastructure, things like that. So those are discretionary grant programs, but they're specifically enumerated in the statute as amended. So you're automatically disqualified from those 17 programs that Mr. Darcy's mentioned. But there's a myriad of other grant programs that you're not, that are not enumerated in the statute, where the schools might want money, the harbor master might want money, the police department might want money, the fire department might want money.
Our beach nourishment that we've gotten.
Yeah, we had beach nourishment money.
Seawall.
The Department of Transportation has grant funds. They all have grant money available under programs that are not listed in the statute. And the governor has sent a memo around to all of the state agencies indicating that communities that are not compliant are not to be considered when grant funds are given out. And we did have a circumstance at the end of February where the airport had received federal funding years ago to reconstruct the airport, but there was an apron project that remained to be completed that's actually being completed now, and that was like another $5 million. Well, there was a ancillary state grant that Mr. Darcy mentioned of approximately $500,000 for new snow removal equipment and maintenance vehicles and some additional fencing. And the state actually, in their zeal to remind all the state agencies that Marshfield was not eligible, notified the FAA. And all of a sudden, we had, I'm sorry, you're not eligible anymore for your federal grant funds. We notified the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General's office scrambled and were able to restore that federal grant, which was one of the representations when you get a federal grant is you're not in violation of any federal, state, or local laws. And they almost cost us that grant.
Well, what I was getting to was you at the beginning, you had numbers. Good. Then you went to 2 slides that listed a number of projects, but there were no numbers. I think you should put some numbers in there, at least some ranges to what that kind of money, where we're risking money, so it can be very plain at the town meeting that we're talking about on average, or, in the past 5 years, now, adjusting for inflation and the cost of some big projects or things that are coming, we're talking about this much money per year, because that seems to be a sticking point with a lot of people who are opposed to this. That's all I'm saying. And you had a thing on there that said the Milton case was settled. I don't know if you have a date. I think you should put a date in there.
I have the date. It was January 8th, and it wasn't settled. It was actually adjudicated. The Supreme Judicial Court issued a written decision overturning the guidelines, but affirming the constitutionality of the law and confirming something the Attorney General wanted, and that was the opinion that they can enforce the bylaw beyond suspending grant funds.
Okay.
One point, Karen, don't we have that decision online? Did we post it?
I'm not sure. I'll have to
Okay.
check.
The other question I had is, I thought, there was lots of talk a year ago, and it talked about the development behind Roach Brothers would meet the requirements that was being asked about. Now, again, I don't know the details of that. What's the story about that? 'Cause
Yeah.
now I go there, there's, 8 buildings, magnificently sized, I'm sure they're very expensive housing, that didn't fulfill the requirement?
No, that's Chapter 40B.
Oh, and,
Chapter 40B is affordable housing under a different state law. We are now at our 10%. Before that second Modera project was put in, we were not at 10%.
okay.
So it's a different state law. We have now met that requirement. And that's about 500 units up there.
Okay.
And that's a great question and distinction as well. So, so the state wants you to have at least 10% of your housing supply to be affordable housing. So because we were below the state's 10% threshold or their 10% target, what that effectively means is there's not really a whole lot that you can do to stop a 40B if an unfriendly 40B comes to your community. So those,
Unfriendly 40B, you've used that term a few times, but
sure.
what do you mean?
So unfriendly means they walk in and they tell us what they're gonna do to us. A friendly one is they come in and say, what can we do to make you say yes for one?
Okay.
Right, and so, I mean, if you're looking for analogies or examples of the state overriding local zoning with really unpopular laws, I mean, that's been on the books since the 1960s. So, like, there is precedent for the state having really unpopular legislation that overrides local zoning and takes a lot of the control and decision-making out of your hands. But to answer your question, yeah, those were two 40B developments, and at this exact moment in time, we're over our 10% threshold, which means we have more levers of power at our control if someone approaches us and wants to build a 40B. But an important distinction is that while the MBTA Communities Act has nothing to do with 40Bs, their focus is on market rate housing. Another important reason why you want the town to be in control and propose this MBTA zoning district is because we have a requirement that 10% of that housing stock be affordable so that we don't fall below 10% again. Whereas if the state picks the district and doesn't have that 10% requirement, then we're gonna fall below 10% again. Pretty quickly, yeah. We'll be out of safe harbor and we'll be subject to another unfriendly 40B being rammed down our throats, quite frankly.
And probably if the state had its druthers and came in and it did whatever it wanted to do, what would be its ideal location and what would that look like? I mean, would it be taking property near Situate line, closer to the MBTA stop, whether it be the Audubon Society, whether it be, I don't know what along 3A, there's a whole bunch of property out there. Would that become their choice? Just like the little development that went in near the MBTA in Situate, the big place, housing place right on the grounds,
Next
right
to
on
the
the
parking
highway.
lot.
And where would they choose that? Could they do that? And, is that the scare factor to what would happen to us?
Unlikely that it would be up in that part of the town because a lot of that property is protected open space. That's what the state says is part of their excluded areas.
Oh, okay.
There is no transit to get to the train up there as well. At one point, the state was trying to tell us that because we have 2 buses a day that get to the Kingston train station, that is our connection to Boston. They have stopped that argument after I explained to them several times. You mean you're taking a Gatra bus for 45 to 55 minutes south to then take a train an hour north?
Right.
That does not make any
I
sense.
mean, none of this makes sense to me. I'm not too sure how any of this solves I totally recognize the need for more housing and affordable housing. I totally see that. It's absolutely. But how does this solve forcing it in Marshfield doesn't seem to be at all a good fit at all.
If you look at the state law, it is for a half-mile radius around train stations.
Right.
But it has a clause that says the state will make regulations.
Yeah.
those state regulations is what dragged us into it as an adjacent community. And that's how we got pulled into this. And it's unfortunate that sometimes the state law is very simple and non-threatening, and then when it gets to the regulation stage, frankly, the state overreaches.
The only thing that, and one more point, the only thing that worries me, Quirk sells. He decides, I can set up someplace else, I'm gonna get, price of cars are going high, he can move, and he could get some chips with government officials by selling his property and giving it over. And I guess we can't know whether he'd sell that property or not, so that's always the big question.
It does appear unlikely that it could be economic for that to happen, because he only has 7.5 potential developable acres on the north side, because 5.2 are restricted with a conservation restriction. A portion of that site is in the Water Resource Protection District. If the bylaw were to pass, they'd be limited to 16 units per acre. If you lost a half acre because of a leaching system and a wastewater treatment facility that would take a few years to permit, you're maybe down to 7 acres. The maximum number of units he could build there is somewhere between 100, 120 units. And if it cost you 10 million plus to buy it, I think the math just doesn't work, because you wouldn't make any money, you'd probably lose money if those were the metrics. I think that's what Ms. Jordan was trying to demonstrate. I think Ms. Jordan's numbers are wrong, not because her result is wrong. I don't think she factored enough negative into the cost to construct when you impose the requirements that the planners have imposed. So that was, I think she was being conservative as to how much money you would lose. And no one's going to buy a project to lose millions of dollars. And so I think that's not a great site. The other sites are smaller and, probably less successful than Mr. Quirk's business appears to be, because that business, his business seems to be doing well enough that he's going to open another business of a dealership. He's got a permit across the street. So he already has a Kia dealership, but he has a permit for another dealership next to the Kia dealership. There's a lot between the Smith and Son and the Kia dealership where he's got a fully permitted car dealership right now. So, but that's not in the district, so it just doesn't seem to make sense. And a lot of the lots are a lot smaller than that. And if you could only go 4 stories, but you had to put a leaching field in, and you're, like, for example, Wendy's probably not a great example. It's a very small lot, but it's in the district. But if that's a half-acre parcel or thereabouts, and you had to have a leaching system in, and you wanted to put a lot of units, and you're constrained by the size of the leaching system there to build something that would be huge. I mean, you could go 4 stories there, but again, I don't know that Wendy's is going to sell. They appear to be a profitable business. They renovated their store a few years back, and the other ones are the Ming Dynasty to the Starbucks. So the Starbucks seems to be amongst the busiest places I've ever seen. There's a 7-Eleven. I don't think they're in the business of selling their properties, and I assure they likely have a long-term lease there. And then that's left as, half the site. And is it possible that someone will buy that and developing it? Again, you got to take a significant portion of that site, reserve it for a leaching field, and I'm pretty sure they're probably making money now. And the conversations I heard with the planner before and assistant planner was that no one's going to take a 3-story building down that's been there for a long time, probably generating significant revenue, to add a 4th story, because you'd have to kick everybody out, and the economics just don't seem to make sense. I haven't run that analysis. I can't give you a guarantee that would happen, but it doesn't make any rational sense that you would take a 3-story building down, kick everybody out, spend God knows how much constructing a 4-story building and then try to attract everybody in. It just doesn't seem logical.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Diane Jordan again. So just more on the Quirk building. So I looked at the cost of running the sewer up there specifically because I did talk to the chair of the ZBA, who told me that, in his opinion, you can't put septic treatment facility there because it's saturated. So the only way to build at that building, to redevelop, would be to bring the sewer system up, which at minimum is $8 million. And then I talked to the building commissioner, who explained that they have permitting, actively pursuing permitting for an electric vehicle facility or
That's the one
showroom or
across the
something.
street that Bob
Right,
mentioned.
so they're moving towards expansion, they're not moving towards selling. And even without any of that, it still comes out at -6%, even using a way low, $2 million low sale price over the assessed value. So,
Thank you. And to follow up on one of your final questions as well, like this state law was drafted by people who had little to no municipal experience. And, that's why there are so many flaws and so many issues with it. And, at the end of the day, if you're a developer acting in your own economic self-interest and you don't care about the character of the community, you want town meeting to vote no. Because then you have options at your disposal that are a lot easier to build in than what's being proposed at town meeting. So, you had mentioned earlier the 240Bs that were put up, in precinct 2A, up on Enterprise Drive. There are still multiple remaining cleared vacant lots in that district that are a heck of a lot easier to build on, faster, easier, cheaper than tearing down existing structures and trying to make the math work by tearing down a 3-story building to build a 4-story, where the math just doesn't quite work out with the cost of materials. So, we're trying to throw up as many obstacles as possible to building, and this district on paper checks off all the boxes the state is looking for, and they've confirmed that it's compliant, but you have all these practical obstacles standing in the way to minimize and mitigate the impact as much as possible. Whereas if we're not in compliance and a receiver, picks precinct 2A, and what would you rather do as a developer? Tear something down, or would you rather build on a vacant cleared lot,
Well, that's to me, it would seem like that's the obvious place, that's the only obvious place. They even have infrastructure in that area to start building. They got their pits, so wouldn't it seem like that's where they're gonna choose if they had to?
The only way that can be developed right now, because we're over our 40B limit, is if a law like this were imposed in that area, or they were permitted under a law like this to construct that number of units. So,
And each of the 40Bs have their own private wastewater treatment plants. They're not connected. And the same with the proprietor's green.
and they brought in a pump station for water as well.
So in, a really, really worst case scenario is you just had 240Bs rammed down your throat. You could have 100% market rate, high density housing built in that area, and then we fall below the state's 10% affordable housing threshold again. We're out of safe harbor, and then we're still subject to a predatory 40B. So
There's no limitation. If that area was zoned our MBTA communities district, and it wasn't zoned the way the planning board has set it up, or that area was permitted, it could be 6 stories with a minimum density of 15 units per acre. And if you look at any of the examples from East Milton, they can locate 90 units in a 6-story building on 1 acre.
Yeah.
So I've seen the plans. It's being constructed today. 92 units on a 1-acre site.
Yeah.
And there's sites up there that are 5 and 10 acres.
Yeah, another place you'd want to go to if you're trying to keep your costs down is go somewhere where there's existing town sewer you can hook up to, so you don't have to spend millions of dollars and 3 to 4 years permitting your own standalone treatment plant. So, frankly, there's plenty of area in Brant Rock. Can you imagine if you could build 500 units at all market rate housing at Blackman's Point, where you can hook up to existing town sewer? Like, how much would the character of that neighborhood change? Or, theoretically, how high is the membership at St. Anne's Church? You could sell that property for millions of dollars, build a 6-story, high-density apartment or condo unit, and, that changes the character of that whole neighborhood. So, you're also impacting residential neighborhoods that way too. So, think of places that are, are on existing town sewer, and you don't have to build your own standalone treatment plant for billions of dollars. So, if you're a developer, precinct 2A, it's already cleared and vacant, or, if you're looking around, Brant Rock or Green Harbor, where you could hook up to existing sewer, that's gonna mitigate your costs a lot, and, you could acquire those properties for millions of dollars and still turn a profit with the density that you can build at and up to 6 stories. Yeah.
Jay?
Yes, thank you, Greg. So we have 2 more virtual hands up. Jay was first. We're going to try to circle back to Jay.
Oh, she's good.
You're good. Yep, you're unmuted. You're good.
Hi, Jackie Mason, 1415 Ocean Street. I have a few questions. I'll start with, can you tell me what the financial future of Marshfield looks like?
And like more specifically, or just, every town is, facing budgetary pressures, right? Because the cost of energy is up, the cost of healthcare is rising, and you're limited by Proposition 2.5 in terms of how much you can increase the taxable levy each year. So it's not just Marshfield, but every town is facing, budget crunches, and more they're having to dip into certified free cash just to meet their operational budgets. So, that's not unique to Marshfield. That's every town is going to be pretty lean over the next several years in terms of just keeping up with their operational budgets for healthcare, energy, wages, and just general inflation overall, and the cost of materials going up. So, yeah, the next several years are going to be pretty lean and pretty tight for sure. And, Jackie, when, we sat down on Monday, and, you could see what the cost-benefit analysis is for this more contained proposed area versus opening the door to a much larger area and the maximum number of units, where it really, drives home what an unfunded mandate this is. So I don't know if that was too broad. Does that answer your question, Jackie?
Well, I just remember you guys and I said where we went from a cup of coffee to an override, and you guys said it's even worse than just an override, where it's looking dark for the financial future. So I just wanted to keep on what that meant.
Sure, yeah, it got garbled and cut out a little bit towards the end, but yeah, right, you can look at what's happening in Marshfield, and you can also look at what's happening in neighboring communities as well as kind of a barometer. And the Mass Municipal Association just came out with a pretty detailed report and a pretty detailed study about a lot of the inflationary and budgetary pressures that towns are facing. So I thought of you when I saw it, so I can send that your way, because I think that would be really informative and helpful. But Marshfield and a lot of towns, yeah, it's going to be tight, the next few years for sure.
Okay, yeah, I would love for you to send me that. And during the meeting, I discussed how it was very important for the town to see the number of units that this just zoning actually requires. Also asked to know what the costs were for full build out would be. And I didn't see that mentioned, so I do, that's brought up during town meeting, so people can have a full view of what they're actually voting on. Can you tell me what is stopping the state from changing the language of this law at any time in the future?
Right. No, that's the risk with every state law, right? They could change the Chapter 40B law and raise the threshold to 15% up from 10%. I mean, that's applicable in a scenario with every single state law on the books. But the idea is that if we pass this district on our own and choose where it goes, it would require additional action and additional steps from the state to update and change the law again. But to answer your question, you know, that's the risk with every single state law, is they could update it at any time, so that's true. And you're muted again, Jackie. I didn't know if you had any additional questions.
Yeah, sorry. And you mentioned if we can't build an area over 40B, then how come we can include 10% as part of our 40B numbers across the street from the industrial district?
So one of the options on the table for us that's left to our discretion if we propose the district is that the state gave us the option to require that 10% of those units to be affordable. So the state does not have that as their requirement. We had the discretion and ability to add that on our own as an additional requirement, in the same way where under the state rules, you could go up to 6 stories, but we capped it at 4 stories. So that's a great question as well. So that's a good point of clarification where if we propose it, there are additional limitations that we can put in, like the 4-story limit and that 10% be affordable.
And what is stopping a builder after they build it from selling it and taking out that 10% and then leaving us to now make up for that 10%?
So if the bylaw were to pass and 10% of any housing that were constructed on the northerly side of Route 139 were to be constructed, before they were allowed to begin construction, there'd be a perpetual affordable housing restriction that would be forever binding on them and all successors and assigns forever. And there's a state law that specifically permits that. It could never be released unless the town chose to release it, I guess, but I don't know why we would. We're imposing that requirement so we have affordable places to live, and, you know, I can't imagine us ever doing that.
Okay, and I just have one last question. If you believe that the state is being unconstitutional by forcing us to say yes, then why do you believe that it's okay to continue to bring us back and force us to say yes?
I'm not forcing anybody to say yes. I, as a courtesy, emailed you my brief. Did you read it already?
Yes, I started reading it, and it's very good, and I believe that.
All right, so let's be.
I don't know why we are bringing everybody back to discuss this when we already voted.
First of all,
what to do with it.
Okay, I'm here to answer questions. I'm not here to tell you to vote yes or no, okay? So the case that we brought says that it violates Marshfield town meeting voters' rights to force them to say yes. Those rights are protected in a greater way than the United States Constitution protects those rights. And I've cited case that explicitly explains that. And when you take these rights away, I say that that law doesn't pass a strict scrutiny analysis and is unenforceable. I think it's a fatal flaw in the law. But as I said before, and I'll continue to say, it is likely that there'll either be this will be rationalized in some way, explained away in some other way, and if it can't be explained away in some other way, I think that the odds are better that the state will change the law and make it a requirement that towns don't get the right to say no to. And I showed you a case that the state has been relying upon. They relied upon it at the time of the motion to dismiss involving the town of Hudson, where Hudson was ordered to chlorinate its water. Hudson refused at town meeting, and the language that was used was bone-chilling. and is exactly the opposite of some of the sentiment that I see online. And it says, and I'll read it because I think people need to hear it, but the powers of a town and of its town meeting and the very existence of a town are subject to the will of the legislature. Powers exercised by the voters in town meeting or by officers chosen by them may be taken away and vested in officers appointed by the governor. Plainly, a town is in no position to defy its creator, the Commonwealth, or attempt to nullify legislative mandates issued under the authority of the general court, which is the legislature. That is what we're fighting against. And what we're fighting against doesn't involve federal issues. Zoning is not a federal issue. Zoning is a state issue. And the state can decide what we can and what we can't zone. The state can decide what quantum of vote, if any, the town gets on zoning. And that's why I think we have to be aware that there is a realistic probability that the town will not be forever free of this issue, even if we win. So the suggestion was, and I was asked this question, can the town pass this bylaw, continue to fight it, and if we win the case, can we void the law? The answer is yes. Will the state change the law? I think you could probably bet on it.
But my point is the people said no. I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah, but
that,
you-
but
but you-
what is different from you guys forcing us to come back to vote again if we already said no? What are you doing different from what you're suing the state for doing?
Well, one of the criticisms last December was we didn't know what the state was going to do in the town of Milton case. And we were rushing it back, and we should wait till Milton was decided. And then we would know whether the law was constitutional. We would then know whether the state could force that law on it and whether it was mandatory and what our responsibilities were. And we know those questions now. We also know that a Superior Court judge, who happened to be a former town council, wasn't compelled by the arguments that we made.
And I know he wasn't compelled because he said plaintiffs have not submitted any actual evidence of costs. And I've seen that with our
All right,
only
well-
5 statements and no financial impact. And I believe
Well,
that the people really need to see a financial
Well,
impact. And I'll finish with that.
I'm
Thank you.
going to respond to that because I think we have an obligation to be honest with everybody. I've provided you
About
the.
time.
I think that's really, a fresh comment. And I provided you because you asked me, and I have spent my own free time trying to
That is
provide you with
fine.
information. I gave you the 5 affidavits that we submitted, Mr. Gehman's analysis of costs and expenses. The affidavits were submitted by Mr. Maresco, Mr. Gehman, the police chief, the harbor master, and the town engineer. And
The town deserves to know, Galvin. I am one person.
my name is-
The entire town
my name is-
deserves to know.
my name is Bob Galvin, or Attorney Galvin. It's not Galvin. I provided you information because you made a request, and you're entitled to know. And I provided my own time.
Worse than everybody else.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what we're doing here. I'm trying to answer your questions, and you made a statement that wasn't true, and I wanted to make sure that you understood why I believe your statement wasn't true.
And, yeah, so we're going to move forward. And Jackie, the chart that you're referring to that we sat down and went over, that'll be part of the presentation at town meeting. So I've got a couple different printouts and drafts in front of me, but the table that we talked about that has the cost analysis for the proposed district versus the worst-case scenario, that'll be part of the town meeting presentation. Yep, exactly. Yeah, so we've got a couple different drafts circulating, so this is the kind of feedback we were looking for tonight to kind of fine-tune things, but that'll be part of the town meeting presentation for sure, and, that slide will be up there for everybody to see, so that'll definitely be part of it. Yes, thank you. All right, so I just want to go in order of, I guess, virtual hands versus in-person hands. So I'll go to Sam first on Zoom, and then we'll go to you, Diane. So Sam, you're good to go. You're unmuted.
Okay, good evening. Sam Alfronti, 36 Crane Road. First of all, I just want to say that I commend all of you. I think the effort you guys are putting in, it's been very informative to listen. And I truthfully think anyone that is listening should vote yes, truthfully. I think the impact of voting no, and you guys have outlined this pretty clearly, could be detrimental to the town. I do have one question though. I missed the first part of Mr. Darcy's presentation. Is Chapter 90 funding part of the funding that could be impacted if a no vote were to happen again?
There is an element of Chapter 90 funding that is non-discretionary or mandatory that is not affected by this. However, all the cities and towns in Massachusetts have the ability to go back and ask for supplemental Chapter 90 funds. And Chapter 90 supplemental funding are considered discretionary, and the town of Marshfield would be not able to reach that. And
Okay.
we have a project that's on the horizon. It involves the Willow Street Bridge. And we're making some takings to prepare for the future bridge that will be constructed there. And I don't believe we have a funding source at this particular time. And that would be one project that's probably important to a number of people where we would probably be ineligible for any state funding.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question. Yeah, that's the only question I had. I thought the presentation was great. I look forward to seeing it on Monday night. And I hope everyone who's listening kind of understands and understands the impact that a no vote could have again. So, thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Thanks. Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify, and correct me if I'm wrong, with regard to the 40B versus the 10% housing, 10% affordable housing. So 40B law doesn't specifically prohibit a developer from building that property, whatever the property is, under 40B, and then reselling it and allowing the units to go to like a full value.
No, that's not true.
How does that
If
work?
a 40B is approved in the town of Marshfield or any other city in town, the units are perpetually restricted as affordable. There's a specific provision of the law that says these types of restrictions are permanent affordable housing restrictions that are not, cannot be released, really.
So I was just going to make the distinction that,
There was a period of time, by the way, where 40Bs were being constructed where the restrictions were not
Okay.
perpetual. But that is not the case now, and all 40Bs that are being constructed in Marshfield have 25% of their market rate, or excuse me, 25% of their units as affordable, whether they're ownership units or rental units.
okay, so that's what the confusion was with with Jackie Mason thinking that it was going to revert to full value in our 10%, but I was just going to make
They never could.
Okay, all right, so that's no longer, in either case, either 40B or this 10% affordable housing, that can't happen. In either
If
case.
we are able to restrict it through a bylaw, those units, those 10% of those units will always be affordable,
Mm-hmm.
whether they're condominiums or rental units.
Okay. And then with regard to the whole, sentiment of why are they making us do this again with town meeting? I feel it's important to say that nobody's making anyone go to town meeting. It's voluntary. Hopefully, a lot of people are watching this meeting, and a lot of people are going to be involved in this decision and voting to approve this zone, but nobody's being forced to be there by anybody. And also, I think that there's a lot more information available now than there was last year. And that, frankly, if the town didn't, if the planning board, for example, didn't pursue this vote again, they would not deserve to work in Marshfield, because the town, everybody involved in this situation is doing everything they can, including not sleeping at night for worry about this to protect the town from literal catastrophe. There's catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe that could potentially happen. And everybody that works for the town that's involved in this is extremely worried about that. So I just want to make the point that this is not a forced thing on anybody. And
Could I just
everybody's
jump in
trying
on
very
this?
hard to
I think
help people understand.
I think that's a valid point. Everybody here is pushing in the same direction. We just have two different views on how to get there. We're trying to stop this,
Yes.
okay? There's a view that you pass the bylaw, you sue the Commonwealth, and you stop it that way. And that's, in some people's perspective, a position of strength. And then there's another perspective. We can stop it by continuing defying them and doing nothing. I have to believe that doing nothing is the worst, is the lesser of the advantageous options to us, because it's without a doubt we would not get sued by the Commonwealth if we passed this. We would still be on the offense challenging their law. We would receive all the monies that potentially have been withheld from us and be unrestricted in our ability to get future funds and still have the ability to challenge the law. Or we could have none of the monies that were promised to us. We could continue to defy the state. The state, in all likelihood, will sue us. The state will have a say in what the remedy is. We'll be in a defensive position where we're saying, don't do that, or you can't do that. And, we're going to have an answer from the appeals court or the SJC sometime soon anyways. It's a weaker position. But you know what? There's commonality in both positions, because no one here is trying to make this work in Marshfield. I think that's what the point is everybody keeps on missing. The planning board believes that we can come up with, I think calling it a district that can't be built in is really what it is. Mr. Geeman and Ms. Horn wouldn't be doing their job if they give you a guarantee and said nothing could be built. But I think they're being conservative in saying the worst-case scenario was 650 units. I think deep down they believe it's going to be closer to zero, because they don't realistically believe, and that's why they chose this area that's already built out. I think that's more realistic to the actual scenario. So, when people online say it's us against them, no, it's one town against this law. No one thinks it's good, okay? So are we going to play the game with the state and zone it in a manner that we know that we are obstructing it and still sue them and try to avoid the law? Or are we going to potentially let the state take the reins and start pulling some strings? And for anybody that doesn't believe that the state can do it, you have to look at the case law. And I appreciate the fact that people want the federal courts to get involved in the situation. But, there's a few of us lawyers in Massachusetts that only do this type of work. And there's a bunch of us that are involved in these types of cases. And we all recognize that zoning is a state issue, not a federal issue. And we all recognize that the Massachusetts Constitution contains the types of protections that people in Marshfield should be relying upon, not the federal Constitution. The cases that I've seen cited are involving the drinking age in the Commerce Act. That's not an issue in this case. If there were someone with a silver bullet and they're holding it back to prove a point and not sharing it with the town, they're doing everyone a disservice, because we would raise it if somebody has a better idea or a different idea. We're all opposed to this. That's what people keep on missing. and I don't understand that. I hate the law. I think it's awful that they told town meeting voters you have to vote yes. That's why I believe in the lawsuit we filed, and I think we stand a good chance of winning it. But I'm also experienced enough to know if the state is committed to this course of action, tomorrow they can make this exempt, and tomorrow we would have no choice.
Thank you.
Jim Fitz disappeared?
Yeah, we had a virtual raised hand from Jim Fitzgerald. You're good. Now you're unmuted. You're good, Jim.
Okay, great. What I was actually raising my hand for was the issue that Bob just brought up. When we were at the advisory board hearing, there was a couple of comments about bringing this to federal court, and I've seen a couple of other comments online about bringing it to federal court. This should go to the Supreme Court, and Bob and I had a couple of discussions about this, about the limitations of taking a state case to a federal court, and I thought it would be good for Bob to explain that in a little more depth, so people can think that we can take this thing all the way down to Washington, D.C., understanding that's not a realistic expectation.
The case that was cited online that I read was the South Dakota versus Dole case. If you read that decision by Justice Rehnquist from the Supreme Court of the United States, the state of South Dakota was upset that the federal government was holding 10% of their federal highway funds because South Dakota had a drinking age of 19 years of age, and the federal government had passed a regulation that no more grant funds, or the 10% was going to be withheld until every state in the United States made their drinking age 21 years. And South Dakota felt that the deprivation of those grant funds was somehow unconstitutional and violated the Commerce Act, not their First Amendment rights or their voting rights or anything like that, the Commerce Act. And interestingly enough, that case resulted in a decision that what the federal government was doing was perfectly legal and not unconstitutional. So I don't know how that case in any way is persuasive. The other case, NFIB, and I forgot the other party read that case as well. It had to do with Medicare benefits, and the federal government passed a law saying that if there was an aspect that affected individual coverage, and then there was an aspect that affected states, and states were basically being told that they would be deprived of all Medicare funds unless they expanded the coverage under Medicare to additional classes that states had not been traditionally covering. And the states, a number of states, I believe, maybe seven or eight, all challenged that, and that law was ruled unconstitutional, but it wasn't because of voting rights. Remember, states don't have voting rights. They have legislators that speak on their behalves. They have voting rights. States and towns don't have civil rights. They're not individuals. Individuals have civil rights. And interestingly enough, if you read that South Dakota case, it's an interesting case for people like me that don't have anything else to do, I guess, at some point. There's a really nice dialogue about what the rights and remedies and the respective relationships between the federal and state governments are. And the same kind of principles apply with state and local rights. But the case that I just read you from the town of Hudson really kind of should put things into perspective for people. Marshfield, predated the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but when the Commonwealth of Massachusetts became the state of Massachusetts, the town of Marshfield was chartered by it, and we agreed to be bound by their rules in the Massachusetts Constitution, and as a result, we exist. And one of the reserve rights that they have is to continue to make laws that apply uniformly across the Commonwealth, or amongst the sufficient part of the Commonwealth that they pass muster, and this is one of the rules that they've made. It's not the other way around, as much as I would like it to believe. And, you know, we're not in colonial times. We're not going to take up muskets and walk up to the State House and send people packing. We can vote them out. And if enough people are upset about the governor, what she's done here, and I think there's probably lots of people in the Commonwealth that are upset. I don't like it. I don't think it's fair at all that they would even push this. But I know that if they reworded it and did it another way, we'd be stuck, and there's nothing we could do. And I expect, even if we win, they'll be back on another day with less. And where we can still attack them from a position of strength, it just seems to be an advantageous position rather than a less advantageous position. But if people want to vote that way, we're going to fight like hell for them, just like I did today when I filed that brief, and I hope we're successful. I just feel like this is not going to be we might win a battle and lose the war.
Yeah, I just want to be clear about that we're thinking that there's an endless series of appeals and avenues that we can go down that would give us other opportunities besides dealing with the state, who's obviously stacked against us, is not a realistic expectation.
Jim, there was one case filed in federal district court by a lawyer on behalf of a group of taxpayers in Rockport, and I am not counsel in Rockport. KP Law is counsel in Rockport. I checked with one of my colleagues at KP Law to find out what happened with that case, and that case was dismissed. That's the only known federal challenge. I'm told that the case is appealed to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. If the lawyer that's representing those taxpayers is successful, we'll all be successful. But that's being challenged there. Again, I think we took the best tactic with the most advantageous constitution, and I think we have a compelling argument. And I hope to win this battle for all of our benefits, because we all, whether you're on the side of your pass it or you don't, I don't think there's any doubt that anybody thinks this is a good law.
No, it's awful, but appreciate all that you've done, and that was the end of my questions.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone knows a constitutional lawyer who's licensed to practice in front of the U.S. Supreme Court and they say they're going to take this case and we're going to win, bring them to town meeting. And so, any other questions from the audience before we wrap up? All right, well, we will see everyone hopefully at town meeting on Monday night at 7 o'clock at the high school. Thank you.
Thank you.